In His grace, God gave us a sequential end-time timeline that was hidden in the Psalms for thousands of years, waiting to be discovered. It has now been revealed here at the last minutes of the church age. This channel discusses end-time prophecy from the unique perspective of the encrypted timeline in the Psalms. If you want to know where we are on the timeline, please subscribe and take some time to watch the other videos on this channel. Also, please consider purchasing a copy of Encrypted, Unlocking the Timeline Revelation in the Psalms. Not only will it help you to better understand the time we're living in, but it will also be a very important book to leave behind. God bless you.
The whole booty thing has me puzzled about Ezekiel 38 and 39. That all of these nations are coming to take booty. They're coming to plunder Israel. And so, and I think I even write about it in the book, just based on the times that we're living in, of course, Israel has a wealth of natural gas off of their shore, right? They have I think it's called the Leviathan gas field out there. And since Europe, with the whole thing with Russia and Ukraine, Europe, basically, and then the explosion of the pipeline, right? Nord Stream 2, I guess, is the one that blew up, or maybe they blew both of them up, I don't know. But anyway, so there's the natural gas from Russia is no longer going into Europe, okay? Right. So Europe is looking for other sources. Well, here you have Israel with all this natural gas, right? So, and they're building a pipeline that's going to go north and eventually make it to Europe. So it kind of...
Heck of a time to do that.
Yeah, but it's looking like that could be part of it, because they're going to be even more wealthy as a nation, right? But so I can see that Russia would have, I could see that they would want to invade, perhaps, because of the natural resources. But the other countries, basically Iran, Turkey, countries like that, they hate Israel and they want to wipe them off the map, right? So they're not really there to take a spoil. But then I heard an interview. Well, it wasn't an interview. So you ever watch some of the videos of the Hamas warriors? Well, they had a spokesman on there, and he had his green scarf on his head, and he's like all covered, and he's got his AK-47, and he's rambling on, whatever, and basically it's being translated at the bottom, and what he's saying is the main reason why they attacked Israel when they did was because of the red heifers.
So they take it serious.
That's why they called it the Al-Aqsa flood or Al-Aqsa storm. Al-Aqsa is the mosque sitting on top of the Temple Mount. Right?
Because they wanted the red heifers, or they wanted to get rid of the red heifers?
They know that if Israel goes through with the red heifers, right, then they're going to build a temple. And they don't want that to ever happen. So they attacked them when they did, according to this guy, who was a spokesperson for Hamas, saying that they could not allow that, basically.
But look how much they know more than Christians do.
Yeah! Isn't that interesting?
Why would that matter? Why would the fact that they build a temple matter to Hamas?
Because it's right where their temple is, right?
Well, yeah, see, the Temple Mount is considered the most holy site for Jews, right? But it's the second most holy site, or third, for Islam.
And they don't want them to lay claim to it.
Exactly. So Islam controls it now. The whole Temple Mount is controlled through it's called the Walk from Jordan. So the Muslims control it, right? Even after the Six-Day War in 1967, where Israel actually took control of it, they gave it back as a peace offering.
That's their problem right there.
Yeah. Well, and now I think they're finally done with that, because they realize there can't be any peace, right?
There never was. I don't even know why they ever thought that was going to be a thing.
Yeah. Was it Moshe Dayan, I think, was the general, and basically they took control of the Temple Mount, and they should have held on to it, and then I think that very day they gave it back. Yeah. And so then Jordan and other countries they set up that basically they would control it. Now, the Israeli police and military, they patrol it, but no Christian and no Jew is allowed to even pray or like carry a Bible on Temple Mount. So the Muslims are up there doing all their prayer, and they've got their mosques and stuff like that, right? But anybody else, if a Christian is allowed up there, which every now and then they allow people to come through and kind of do a walk around, but if they even suspect that you're praying internally, like if you stop and you're just kind of like, you're out of there, you're in trouble. Yeah, it's crazy.
Kind of like American schools.
Thank you.
Nowadays,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, how far we fallen, huh?
We're not far from that.
No, in England, did you guys see, this is a while back, but there was a lady standing out in front of an abortion clinic, and she was silently praying, and the police came up and they arrested her.
I heard of
Yeah,
that.
it was in Birmingham,
Yeah,
England.
right.
Yeah,
Or you could be Kamala Harris and you could go inside.
yeah,
She supports it, so yeah, they're all for that. Satan's all for that.
yeah.
Satan knew she was praying. Satan.
Yeah. But you know what surprises me is that, these everyday police officers are willing to go along with
Yeah, well,
this.
scumbags,
Who's
huh?
the guy willing
Yeah.
to do that? No.
Right. So you
You'd be
have,
scared.
So they lose their credibility. You want to back them up like when things happen to them, but then you go do that?
yeah.
Yeah, whatever then at
Now, but
that
you can't
point in
group
time.
all cops together.
Well, that's true, but you don't really know who's who anymore,
Who's I know,
right?
'cause the
Well,
guy
because they
who
also have to
died
do my job.
was
Put on hold.
gonna quit.
Just a lot of them do far and beyond. They think that they should.
I was like, well, I had my orders.
Yeah, I have
Well, that was Nazi Germany
Yeah,
too, right?
that's what-
Well, I had my orders.
They gunned down those little kids in the
But
street.
we put 1,200 people in the gas chamber at the same
Yeah.
time.
Look what they're doing to Trump.
That's so
Anyway, I was going to start tonight basically by saying that, when you go through YouTube right now, you'll see a lot of I do anyway, because this is the kind of stuff I look for, right? A lot of Christian stuff, a lot of stuff about the solar eclipse and just the signs of the times and things like that. And there's a lot of videos out there that'll say, kind of like this, what's next? What's coming? What's 2024 going to look like? What's the future look like? When is Jesus coming back? And all these kind of things. I think what's kind of unique about our teeny tiny little meeting here is that before seeing the sequence in the Psalms, it was just speculation and guess. You're looking at the news and you're thinking, well, okay, it looks like this could be developing, and then you've got Turkey and you've got, Russia and whatever, but, people have been speculating for a long time. So, in my humble opinion, having the sequence, that really didn't start with me. It started here with J.R. Church. How many have the book now? You do. Anybody else?
Yes, I read it. It's interesting.
You've started reading?
yeah.
Yeah.
She's a reader.
Yeah.
Well, it's something that, like I told Carl, getting this is something that's touched him, that has blessed me, that has brought me closer to the Lord. That it's been a long time. It's been a long time, even around, so-called Christian church people, that I didn't get the, and there's just something about this, because it interconnects between the Old and New Testament. And I've talked to different people I have a lot of respect for, and they agree.
Yeah, the interconnectivity is pretty amazing,
Yeah.
actually. But so, Lori, because we've talked about this, but this book is from J.R. Church. It was written, he was a pastor. He started a radio program and a magazine, a prophecy magazine, and this book, the second edition, came out in 1990, and he had discovered that there was a correlation between each of the Psalms, starting with Psalm 1, that matched something, like a verse in it, matched something historically that happened in 1901. And then like 1948 and Psalm 48 There's something there, 1967, there's something there. So all of these events, and it all has to do with Israel. So it's not like America or Russia or anything like that. It's all based on Israel, which is what the Bible's based on, right? And so he found this correlation, and he wrote the book to basically explain, here's a verse in, like, let's say Psalm 4 that matches 1904. And you can see this continuing pattern. But what he did is he got up to 1990, and he said that he was afraid of being labeled a date setter, and he didn't want to look into the future of any of this and write about what he sees happening in the future. But then it's interesting, because when I wrote my book, I didn't look into what he talked about in the Psalms for today either, because I didn't want to be kind of influence. Thank you. You always have that great word, influence. That's the second time she's had to fill in the blank for me. I didn't want to be influenced. But then,
She's your little secretary.
yeah. So after writing the book, I went through and I looked at it. This actually wasn't that long ago, and saw, like, for Psalm, I think it was Psalm 30. He basically, Psalm 30. He says, "By now the abomination of desolation seems to have taken place. The remnant has escaped to the mountains." So it's not that he didn't look into it, he just didn't want to write about it. He's now with the Lord. He's not here anymore. Yeah. So then, as I was studying and writing, I stumbled onto the other set of Psalms that match. So you've got the 15 Psalms of Ascent, and then you've got the 12 Psalms of Asaph. And they seem to do this. So if you put them on a calendar, on a timeline, they're a match for the tribulation period. So originally the subtitle was going to be a guide to and through the tribulation period, and somehow, I don't know, eventually that got changed. But anyway, so that's kind of what it is, because the 15 Psalms of Ascent, they start with Psalm 120, which according to J.R. Church then would match 2020, right? But that's not when the tribulation started. So it's a 15-year span, but it's not just the 7-year tribulation period. Same with the Psalms of Asaph. There are 12 of those, but so they all overlap each other. Anyway, if you haven't read the thesis of the book, and Caesar, you probably haven't, then this might all seem really confusing. But
I'll be able to catch up very quick. I just don't like reading, to be honest with you. That's why I asked you for a digital copy.
Yeah.
I don't have a digital copy.
yeah,
This thing, I've had this, December, and I only read a little bit at a time, because I only read so much, and then I won't retain the rest of it. So a few pages here, and that's how.
Yeah.
And then I go back and double check with, in the Bible, cross-reference stuff, and it's all adding up.
Yeah, I've tried to do that. Like the Bible, when I would read it, I couldn't retain it. So I would even read it 3-4 times, and I couldn't because I'm so stupid and slow when I read. It just, to me, it's so hard for me to read.
And yet he's an engineer, just so you know.
I can read plans, because I don't have to read, letters.
Yeah.
But, reading is just my biggest difficulty. But when I start hearing the Bible, you can get on the Bible app,
mm-hmm.
you can just turn it on and just go for hours. And you can go through a whole book in 30 minutes.
You're an auditory learner.
Huh?
You're an auditory learner.
Yeah.
You can go through a whole entire, the whole book of, which one was it? Like Hosea? I went through the whole book in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's just, and I retain it a lot more, and it seems more interesting, just like when I came here last week. To me, this is one of the most interesting Bible studies I've ever been to, because I can, associate with what you're looking at, or
Yeah.
what you're trying to
Yeah.
accomplish.
Well, and we're basically having a conversation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, back, I used to read the Bible the same way. Just, read a few verses and then like, oh, wow, I was actually thinking about the carburetor on the car while I was reading that, right? And I have to go back and read it again, and then my mind's wandering somewhere else. And I think we all do that. I'm going to research this a little bit, but I was listening to a rabbi talking about the 4 levels of, and I thought it was interesting that it was 4, but the 4 levels of studying the Torah, the scripture, right? Number 1 was just like reading it, right? And then there's like reading what the sort of, I've talked about this before, like sort of like an onion, you just keep peeling those layers back. Well, their understanding is there's 4 layers to it. And I can't tell you what they are because I didn't write it down. I was listening to it. I'm going to go back and listen to this teaching from him. But it all made a lot of sense. And
Who was that
so,
again?
what's that?
Who was that again, sorry?
It was a rabbi, a
Oh,
Jewish
yeah.
rabbi, yeah.
That's all you're
And
doing, just gonna tease us with that?
Yeah, I need a
I'm
name.
sorry.
I wanted a name.
I have work to do too every week. So I'm working, right? And I've got this stuff playing in the background. But,
I wanna know the 4 layers.
well, I'll get to them. But what I realized is what we're doing here is we're peeling back and we're looking sort of under the hood at all 4 of those layers with the way that we're kind of conducting business here. And the book kind of does that too.
I ordered that Hidden Prophecies, but it doesn't come for a while.
You actually found one?
No, yeah, it's used.
Yeah.
Yeah, why was he?
Oh yeah, no, this actually was printed, I think, in 1990.
It says 86.
This is the 2nd edition. So I think this one actually goes through 1990 because that's when he, added to it. But the 86 one, you'll be missing a few years.
Great.
But, I mean, it's not that big of a deal.
Hidden Prophecies.
So, let me see what all we've got.
Was it the devotional reading, historical reading, lyrical reading, and Lutheran theological reading?
No.
Well, I can't. Well, no digital copy, but
That sounds pretty drab.
And then there's some Hebrew stuff in here, I don't even know how to say it.
I'll have it for next week. But, yeah, the point is that I think most of us, when we're reading the Bible, well, okay. So, like, remember I was telling you that we were driving down the road and Tammy's reading Luke 2, and, in the past, it's just a matter of reading it, right? Just reading it, and okay, that's cool. But all of a sudden, these numbers and details jumped off the page at me, and then I came back and spent how many hours studying Luke 2 verses, there were 3 verses in particular, and then went and looked up, like, what do all of these names mean in Hebrew, and the numbers that are associated, and can I plot that on a timeline? And so that's like the 4th level of this, according to the rabbi. Now, they spin off and they get into Kabbalah and all this kind of stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just studying the Bible, not like trying to make some mystical magic out of it. But anyway, so this week I put together 3 new interconnected matching timelines that you guys might think I'm crazy, but take a look at them anyway. And I wish it would be big enough on my screen to see what it was I did, but it's not. So, Abraham's timeline. Now, Abraham obviously had a much longer stint in the Bible than just Genesis 12 through 16, but that happens to be when Abraham is specifically 75 years old, right? He was born in 1948 BC. Israel was reborn in 1948 AD. So then you have to wonder, is that just a coincidence? Or is that important? And when you realize how important numbers are in the Bible, I mean, numbers are specific. Like, think about how many times the number 7 is. God's telling another story with that number, right? Or 40 or 80 or whatever. So when when there are certain events that happen and God specifically says, oh, by the way, Abraham was 75 years old when this happened. Okay, well, he didn't say when he was like 43, right? He didn't really talk about his age. So I believe personally that it's important. It's something to take note of. And then realizing that Israel right now is also 75 years old. Okay, so that's interesting. And I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on these, but if you want to take a picture of it, or if you want me to send it to you, I can. Because as you read through it, you'll understand what I was trying to say. And I didn't do this today; it was a few days ago, so I'm
still waiting for the PDF from last week.
okay. I need a secretary, somebody. I need help.
That's all I am for Michael.
It's interesting, like that 48 part, I'm just thinking about this. It's like in 1 Kings when Solomon was ready to build a temple.
Mhm.
The 48 part, just, I'm looking at that because they make a point to say it was 480 years since they were, the slaves
Yeah.
they left Egypt to when they started that temple. Exactly 480 years.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking the 48.
I talk about the 480 in the book too, because that jumped off the page to me also.
Yeah, that number is like, and they had to say it, like for some
Yeah.
reason they just threw it out there.
Well, so here's something interesting, like going back to the solar eclipse. So in the story of Abraham from Genesis, was it Genesis 14 all the way to Genesis 23, I believe, there are 2 400s in Abraham's life in that time, okay? So basically God tells him, when he divides the animals and all that, God tells him that his descendants are going to be in another land, meaning Egypt, for 400 years, and they'll be oppressed basically by that country. Okay, which I thought was interesting because they weren't oppressed for that whole time, 400 years, right? Because we know that Joseph was the ruler for 80 years. So if they were there, and there's a debate between if they were there 480 years, 430 years, or 400 years, and then some calculated that it looks like they were probably under the oppression of the Egyptians for about 215 years. So there's a lot of debate about it. But the point is, God says 400. And then when Sarah dies, Abraham purchases the cave of Machpelah, where she's buried, for 400 silver shekels. So you just keep seeing this 400 over and over, okay?
That's right.
Then, so I'm looking at the solar eclipse and just studying eclipses, and there's 2 400s involved in an eclipse. The sun is 400 times larger than the moon, and it's 400 times farther. It's 400 times larger and 400 times farther away from the Earth than the moon. And
It's
so
the same size.
it appears to be
Yeah.
exactly. So is that a coincidence, right? He is an engineer. Yeah.
We finally see it.
You're not just an executive.
Yeah.
So I've been studying a lot on the whole division of the animals, and we talked about that last week, and how each of them kind of fall into the timeline, also the different type of animals, and it's 3 years, 3 years, 3 years. I am not going to go into all that again tonight, but we were talking also about how with the solar eclipse, that the first one that came across in 2017, which was what, August 21st, 2017, that it crossed 7 cities named Salem, right? Remember that? And hardly any major Jewish population centers in our country. However, even the Jewish people who are talking about this, the rabbis right now about this eclipse, they're pointing out that this next one is going to cross, or at least be seen from, all of the major Jewish centers in our country,
Including
right?
one in Nova Scotia?
Yes, up in there, because there's a lot of them in Montreal, in that area. So there are a total of 8 cities named Nineveh in the world.
That's crazy.
It's going to cross all of those.
That's crazy.
That is really, really crazy.
Have
Se-
you ever heard of Troy Brewer?
Uh-uh.
He just did a teaching on the April 8th eclipse and what you need to know. I'll forward that to you.
Okay. Yeah, that's what
Talks about that.
we've been talking about that for a few weeks now.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe he's got some of the same stuff that he's figured out.
Do you have that diagram you could show Pastor Roy real quick?
Which one?
What shows where the...
Oh yeah.
This is
Okay.
interesting.
Back for my sake.
No. It's interesting. Like,
So the 2017 eclipse that crossed just our country, no other countries, right? And that's kind of unheard of too, because it went from sea to shining sea. That's this one right here. And then last year we had this one that came down. It wasn't a full solar eclipse, it was partial. And then this year, this is the one that's coming up through our country. And if you notice
the symbol.
that they form, and you have to turn it a little bit, but they also form, okay. Remember I was talking about 400 and how all that interconnects? Well, the letter Tav in Hebrew, the 22nd Hebrew letter, the last letter, is also 400, right?
Of course.
So when, like in Revelation, when Jesus says that he's the Alpha and the Omega, right, the beginning and the end, he's in Hebrew, he's the Aleph and the Tav. Tav equates to 400. So now you've got this interconnection between a solar eclipse. You've got basically the Paleo Aleph and a Tav overlaid across our country. You've got the fact that it crosses 8 Ninevehs, and there aren't any other Ninevehs in the entire world. Even in Iraq today, the place where Nineveh used to be is basically Mosul. It's not called Nineveh. Isn't that just awfully coincidental? Right? So I had, let's see, this is from the Encyclopedia Britannica, just talking about coincidence. It says the sun and the moon are about the same size when you look at them in the sky, though that's just thanks to the coincidence that the sun is about 400 times farther away than the moon and also about 400 times bigger. So according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, that's a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence at all.
Yeah.
So now, if we bring this back to why is this coming across America? And, yeah, that's a good question. If you look at the timeline and you understand prophecy, it honestly makes a lot of sense, but it's not a good thing for America, right? According to the ancient Hebrew writings, a full solar eclipse is a bad sign. Remember, Genesis 1:14, God said he put the sun, moon, and stars in the sky for signs and for seasons, for Moedim, right? The first thing he says is signs. Jesus said in the end there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars, right? And then once all these things are completed, you know.
It's pretty big signs.
Yeah, those are big signs.
Solar eclipse is pretty big sign.
So then back up for a second and think about it. So where are we, remember, this is all about Israel, right? So what did God tell Abram at the time in Genesis 12? I'll bless those who bless you and I'll curse those who curse you and your descendants, right? Who are his descendants? And we're not talking about the line of Ishmael, because God said that that's not the line, right? It's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob being Israel. So, I mean, you can see it. Turn on the news. Really. Even this week, what was it? That Schumer guy was basically. Did you guys hear about that?
Terrible speech.
Yeah.
Blasting.
Yeah. They're trying to sow division in Israel. They're trying to take down Netanyahu. And again, you know what? I don't have a dog in that. I look at governments nowadays and I don't really trust anybody. I mean,
Right.
honestly, how can you anymore? But when it comes to Israel and the country, the land, and the people, those are God's. That's God's land, God's country, and that's God's people, right? And this book is all about Israel. This book is all about Israel. And this book is all about Israel. It's always about Israel. You can't start the end times without Israel. So if we're turning our, if the Gog Magog war started on October 7th, and I fully believe that it did, just as prophesied, not in the Bible, but by ancient Jews, basically, that wrote about it. Lori, they wrote, I was talking to Pastor Pete about this a few weeks ago when he was here, that the Gog Magog invasion, the war would last for 12 months, and then there would be like a final 12 minutes where God just like pours out his wrath on those invading. So if you look at that, I said earlier, I've always kind of read through Ezekiel 38 and 39, which is the Gog Magog invasion chapters, right? And thought, well, it sounds like, man, that's just going to be a big thing, and maybe it'll take a day or something. You don't really stop and read it and think about, how could that even be? Like, how could this be a quick thing? When God pours out his wrath on them, I think that is going to be a quick thing. But the lead up to it doesn't have to be quick, right? I kind of got sidetracked earlier. I was talking about how the booty part of it, and then we were talking about the natural gas, and that seems to kind of make sense, right? But we know that the Muslim nations, the Arabs, and then also the Persians, which is Iran, that they want Israel to just not exist anymore. And then I was telling you about the guy who said it was about the red heifer. They don't want Israel to build their temple, because they know that if Israel builds the temple, then they're out, right? That land will never be, they want the land, basically. They hate Israel, they want the land, they don't want to live in a two-state solution like Biden keeps talking about, like Obama talked about, like Bush talked about, like they've all to Clinton talked about. There is no two-state solution.
Yeah, they're not saying that.
No.
They want Jews dead, that's it.
They want them gone. They want all the land. They don't want some of the land. I mean, if you boil it down,
From the river to the sea.
yeah, they want all of it. They don't want to live next door to the Jews, right? Gaza was a two-state solution. They had self-rule, and what did they do with all the billions of dollars that the world gave them every year? They built munitions and tunnels and stuff like that. They didn't build infrastructure and help their people. So this is where we're at. But going back to what the Hamas spokesperson said, that it's about the Temple Mount and it's about those red heifers, they had to stop that. And they knew that the red heifers were over 2 years old now, and they could be sacrificed at any minute. And once they're sacrificed and burned, and then they do the purification rituals, that it's over with. Israel's not going to turn back and stop at that point, right? So they have to put a stop to that. But so when you think about it, Israel has all of the elements that they need for the temple. They have the huge golden menorah, they have the table of showbread, they have, you name it, they've already produced it. They've got it all ready to go, right? All of that stuff, when you read Ezekiel 38 and 39, the plunder that it sounds like they're coming for, I'm starting to think that that's the plunder they're coming for. God doesn't point it out. He doesn't say it's the elements for the temple, but the things that go in the temple are very valuable. It's gold and all types of jewels and things like that.
Yeah, that's what they always took out. Babylon.
Exactly.
They always took out.
See, there's a pattern. There's a historical pattern. The Babylonians, they come and they've robbed the temple, right? They take all of that. So is it possible that that's what we're really dealing with this? It's just that it's encrypted in there. God obviously didn't want a lot of this stuff to be known until time. You can go to Daniel chapter 12 and figure that out, right? Daniel, seal all of this up, But in the last days, right, the wise will understand what all this means. So right there, God's telling him that for thousands of years, it wasn't time to know these things. But now that we're kind of living in those days, it starts to make more sense. Think about this. So when Jesus in Matthew 24:15 says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, right? Well, how would they see that? How could that even make sense? Because no one's allowed into the holy place.
Right.
So how could you see it unless there was a TV camera or cell phones, right? How could people around the world see what Jesus was talking about? It really doesn't make sense. But to us it does. Because that could be beamed around the world. And when the two witnesses are killed in Jerusalem at the midpoint of the tribulation period, it says the people will rejoice all over the world and they'll all see this happen. How could 200 years ago or even 100 years ago?
Right.
No one could have even imagined seeing that in real time around the world, right? It didn't make sense. But we live in a time where all this makes perfect sense and we don't even stop and think about it, right? We just read it and go, yeah, I get that.
And now it makes sense.
Yeah,
when you read it.
absolutely. So I probably got all lost in there again. Yeah, I think that the Temple Mount, again, they literally called their attack the Al-Aqsa flood and the Al-Aqsa storm. Al-Aqsa is the mosque that sits up top of the Temple Mount, right? And when you look at Iran, for instance, they call their elite strike force the Al-Quds Brigade. That's what they call Temple Mount. That's what Iran calls Jerusalem. They won't say Jerusalem, and they won't even acknowledge that Israel exists, and they don't have any maps that show Israel, right? Because they don't want to even believe for a second that Israel is real, because they hate them that much.
Right.
Well, you have to wonder, why do they hate them so much? Well, it goes back to, Jacob and Esau and Ishmael and then Isaac, and it goes way back.
For a long time, yeah.
It's demonic. I mean, it's purely demonic. It has to be.
Well, Satan does too. Once you start those heifers, when those things are sacrificed, game over. This is it. Time, the clock's ticking, and it's over for him too. He knows that too.
I believe wholeheartedly that there are people in this world in government that know the time that we're living in. And I know for a fact that Satan knows what time we're living in. Personally, I've had 20 to 30 years to study this kind of stuff. Satan's been studying it for thousands of years. And just like when Jesus approached the man with the, I forget it, was it the one with the legion of demons or another guy? But anyway, the point is that Jesus approaches him and the demon speaks to him and says, "Why are you here? It's not time." You think they don't know the timing? They know the timing. Why do you think all of a sudden we've got everything's upside down? What's black is white and white is black and good is bad and bad is good, and they know what time it is. I think it's just Christians that don't know what time it is. The Muslims know what time it is. They're ready for their Mahdi to show up. They're ready to defeat Israel. They're ready for all of this to happen,
But they don't believe the end game.
No.
They don't believe what the end game means for them. If they did, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing.
Well,
Same like what you're
yeah,
saying.
they have their own eschatology where they're the victors,
Right.
basically. They believe that Jesus is Isa is going to come back and convert the world to Islam. That one day their two angels are going to bring him back down from heaven, where he's at right now, and that he's going to tell all the Christians that you were all wrong, that Muhammad is the guy you should have been following, right? And then Jesus is basically going to live a normal life, get married, have kids, and die.
So he did all that for nothing?
Yeah, that's what they think. Well, they don't believe that he actually died on the cross. They think that it was like smoke and mirrors somehow.
Somebody pulled him off and he was all right?
Yeah, no, he was good. They just hid him away, and then an angel took him to heaven, and
Because it's a
he's going to come
survival
back. So, yeah, they have their own thing going, and they have what they call the Dajjal, which is really interesting because when you read Zechariah and you read Revelation and a few other places, you realize that the Antichrist is going to have an arm that's going to get wounded and suffer a mortal head wound. Well, their Dajjal figure, you can look it up and see pictures of what they consider their Dajjal. He has like an eye patch. They know that he's this guy. When I say Dajjal, that would be like us saying Antichrist. So they believe they have their 12th Imam or their Mahdi, right? He's going to be sort of their Messiah figure. But then there's going to be this bad guy, and he's going to be the one that's going to have his eye poked out or, you know, whatever. So a lot of this stuff kind of interconnects, but it's really weird and it's really hard to figure out. I've thought about it like, okay, if I were Satan, and I'm not, just so everybody knows, or if I were the Antichrist, right, and I'm buzzing around out there and I'm, you know, talking to world leaders behind the scenes or whatever, how would I orchestrate this, and how would I convince the Muslims and the Jews that their way is right even into the tribulation period? Does that make any sense? So they're going to be seeing certain things, but they're going to interpret it from their scriptures. But up until a certain point, they need to all be convinced that they're right, and then all of a sudden, I think it's going to be like a huge rug pull.
Yeah.
Right? They're going to be corralled, they're going to be convinced, and then all of a sudden, you know, that's the day that the Antichrist stands in the temple and declares that he is God.
Right.
That is Revelation chapter 12, Matthew 24:15, Daniel 9:27. Let's see. I wanted to show you all, because I worked really hard on these. Abimelech. You might know who Abimelech is?
Pastor Lori.
Somebody's kid.
Yeah, Gideon's kid. So evidently Gideon had 72 kids, okay? That's an interesting number. Remember how many demons there are in, according to... Ah!
You're paying that one child support payment.
So, when you look at, what is it, Judges chapter 9, I think? I have it up there, yeah. Judges chapter 9, it's about Abimelech. And so Abimelech was he was Gideon's son, but not through a wife, I think through like a concubine or something. You know, there's a lot of weird stuff going on back then. He killed 70 of his brothers on a stone. He had another brother that escaped, a younger brother, and he decided he was going to be the king, okay? Remember, this was in the time of judges. There were no kings. God did not allow kings, right? So Abimelech takes it onto himself. He's going to kill all his brothers. He's going to go to his mother's town and get all of her side of the family and all the people in the town on his side and basically take over. So before this, you had Deborah, and then you had Gideon, right? So there's 80 years, 40 years each. That's interesting. You know, why is it, again, just like David and Solomon, it's 40 and 40, right? They ruled for 40 years each. Now here you have Deborah and you have Gideon, and there's another 40 and a 40, and then what happens right afterwards? Kind of like with David and Solomon, right after Solomon died, his son Rehoboam, I can't say that. I sound like an idiot. Rehoboam. Yeah. So in Israel, the king that became, so they divided basically, is long story short. When Solomon died, Rehoboam, the R guy, yeah, he took over, and he was an evil king, bad, you know, all this kind of stuff again. And that's when Israel divided from Judah. So that's why you had two nations then. So again, they never make it past 80, right?
Yeah.
That's where that starts. So here, in the time of Judges, you have a 40 and a 40, so you have an 80, and as soon as Gideon is gone, this son decides he's not going to be a judge, he's going to be a king, and he's going to take over. And then if you look at the story, there's a lot of similarities here. So the point is, God keeps telling this story that after 80, something really bad happens and someone really bad steps in. Okay, so if we compare that to the timeline in the Psalms, we see that at 80, which is Psalm 80, it also matches Psalm 55, and it also matches Psalm 128, right? It'd be 2028 on our calendar. That's where the Antichrist is going to declare that he's God in the temple, and then Israel from that point on. This also lines up with the fig tree generation prophecy that Jesus gave in Matthew 24 and Luke 21. That's the point when Israel will basically be divided. Zechariah says that 2/3 of Israel will be killed and 1/3 will survive. They'll go into hiding, basically, which is Revelation chapter 12. So I just think it's interesting that I keep finding 80, and then it all falls apart throughout the Bible. There's always this 80 and then bad, right? And I also found, did everybody get that wants it?
Yes.
I also found this one is a little more encrypted because it's not based on 80 years. But it's King Uzziah. And so you'll have to do a little bit more reading and sort of decoding on this one. But so King Uzziah, he was a good king, but he was very prideful. And he decided that he was going to take the place, basically, of the high priest and go into the temple, into the Holy of Holies, and burn incense to God, right? Well, again, God, only Jesus, and in the past Melchizedek, who was probably Jesus, is both king and priest, right? The king is not allowed to go in there and do any of this. So he got his own garment made, and he had his jewels and all this stuff, and basically went in to act like he was the priest. And the high priest plus 80 other priests, so there's the sort of encrypted 80 again, stopped him. And then you have to piece things together from Amos and Zechariah, 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, and also from, why can't I think of his name all of a sudden? Josephus, the historian. He kind of ties a lot of this together. Because historically, you could look this up, they know that around the time of Uzziah, that there was a huge earthquake in Israel. Well, Josephus writes it, who was a Jewish historian, right, in the Roman time. He writes about this, and he says that it happened at the same time that King Uzziah went into the temple, and the reason why the sun shined on him and he got leprosy immediately, and then he had to run out, and was because there was an earthquake, and the temple split, and the sun shined in, and basically God orchestrated this. So he got leprosy, but there was this huge earthquake at the same time. So there's the connection again with the number 80, right? It wasn't 80 years, but there just happened to be 80 priests. Not 76, not 79, not 83, but 80 again, right? And I keep seeing this pattern over and over in the Bible. There's a few more that I haven't graphed yet, but I'll get to them. Anyway, so we've got an 80, and then we have a really bad guy going in, who was prideful, right? Who goes into the temple and wants to be, he is the king, but he also wants to be the priest. Well, what's the Antichrist going to do? Right? He's basically a counterfeit of Jesus, who is the king, he's the Messiah, and the high priest. You know, we can go read Hebrews chapter 7, for instance, right? So here again we have sort of a pattern of a past king doing the exact same thing in the temple.
So is he declaring himself as the high priest?
Well, what we don't know is what his motives were. We just know that the Bible tells us that he was full of pride.
Because how would they normally become the high priest?
Well, first of all, you have to be of the Levitical line. Yeah, and he wasn't. I think he was of the Judah, line of Judah, right? So he had no power or authority to do what he was doing. Like, it was forbidden by God. And so the high priest and the 80 other priests stopped him from going in there. And he was really angry and he wanted to kill them. And that's when the earthquake, according to Josephus, happened. The temple wall split open, sunlight shined in, and then from that point on he had leprosy, and he spent the rest of his life living alone until he died. And he wasn't even really the king anymore. Yeah, exactly. So there's a moral to that story, but basically pride will get you. But also the fact that there's an 80 involved with the temple and another bad guy trying to be both king and priest at the same time, right? So like Abimelech, and I think I have it on there on the other slide, but Abimelech, his name means my father is the king. So when you look up like what the names mean and then all the different interconnections, it starts to make more sense too, because think about it. Gideon was his father. His father wasn't a king, he was a judge. Why on earth is this guy named my father is king? It just doesn't really make any sense, right? But then when you look at the future connection with the Antichrist, like we talked about, the possible Nephilim connection, the Nimrod connection.
Do we know
I don't
how
know.
long Abimelech lived after that happened?
Abimelech. How long? Okay, that's interesting too. Abimelech lived for 3.5 years. Just over 3 years, between 3 and 3.5 years.
Okay, then this
And
is
then,
Uzziah.
just like in Daniel chapter 2, he was hit by a big rock. So think about it. He killed his 70 brothers on a big rock, and then a woman threw a big rock off of a tower and struck him in the head. Now that didn't kill him. It wasn't it was a mortal injury. So he had one of his like armor bearers or whatever with a spear. He just said, I don't want to be known for a woman, the guy that a woman killed, so run me through with my spear or sword. I can't remember which it was.
Yeah.
But when you do the math, he was, it would have been around 3.5 years between the time that he declared that he was the king, which there wasn't supposed to be a king, right? And the time when he was killed. And according to Daniel, what's it going to be? From the time that the Antichrist declares he's king and the high priest in the temple, God is what he's declaring, till the end is 3.5 years. So
Okay,
just
so-
all these things keep fitting perfectly.
So how long did King Uzziah live after that leprosy?
Well, I think he lived like 17 years or something, but he wasn't even like a force anymore. His son actually took over the rulership of the country at that point. He was just out of the picture. But I think like in Daniel chapter 2, what's that?
Do you know who his son was? Uzziah's son?
I don't remember his name.
Or he did?
They were all bad. Like they're just consecutive bad kings, right? It'll say, like in 2 Kings, it'll say, and he did evil in God's eyes. And they didn't tear down the Asherah poles, and they, there was always this, demon worship. I mean, it's really what it boils down to. It's demon worship
And
in the
always
land
an
of
abuse
Israel.
Power kind of thing too, huh?
What's that?
Always an abuse of power.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that's really how, I'm going to try it again. Rehoboam. Rehoboam. Oh,
You did it right the first time, then you did
Did
it
I?
again. Yeah.
oh,
Just stick
man.
with what
Why
you
can't I
said.
say that name?
You
It's
did
so
say it.
stupid. I'm glad Joel didn't name their new baby Rehoboam, whatever. Just Ray a baby. But anyway, so like the 10 tribes that were north of Judea, basically, they asked for King Rehoboam to go a little bit more lenient on them and not be so harsh with them. And then what he did is he went to King Solomon, his father's, to their counselors, basically, the people who counseled him on things. And they said, yes, you should do this, right? But then he went to his peers, all these young punks, basically, in the kingdom. You know, the ones he hung out with. The Devons, basically. And in his buddies. And they were like, no, you should really sock it to him, right? And so that's why the country split. Because they were just like, no, we're not going to deal with that. So they split. And so from that point on, there was his nemesis, basically, was Jeroboam in Israel, north of them. And then from that time on, they fought and had wars and all kinds of stuff, off and on. So basically, Israel was a mess at that point, the descendants of Israel. So, but I mean, I believe these are patterns. So again, you've got an 80, and then everything's all messed up. Lori, I know that you know, a lot of this we've talked about here, how like legit the 80 thing is in Israel, and how even you can go to like Al Jazeera and read what they write about this fact that they all know that Israel is cursed with this 80-year thing. We've also got...
So the Jewish people have never exceeded 80 years in Eretz Israel as a sovereign united state. We're now 73 years old. Man, this time, we're not going to let it fall apart. We're not going to let it fall apart. That's why...
So they know it.
Well, according to the timeline in the Psalms, it is going to fall apart. At 80 is when the Antichrist declares he's God. And so that's 5 years, less than 5 years from now. If all of this, and all of this, plus all of the timelines that I'm finding since then, that we're talking about right now, if those are all true, which, I mean, okay. Remember how a few weeks ago we talked about how there's no proof of any of this, but there's a mountain of evidence. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Eventually, you just have to say, well, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. It just looks like this is what's really happening.
Well, not anymore. You can be whatever you
Well,
want.
that's true. Well, okay, you could be transitioning into a duck, maybe. Oh, we did this one already. Did I do all of them? So there's Uzziah and Abimelech and Abraham. Okay, well that's it. So last week we did Moses' timeline. So they all end up around 2028, right? With something major. And then we've got...
Wait, go back.
Oh.
Moses. Okay, then the next one.
So Psalm 90, Moses says that, you know, man's life basically you live till 70 or 80 and then we fly away. Well, what did they do when Moses was 80 specifically? Psalm 90 was written by Moses. It's the only psalm out of the 150 that was written by Moses. And he says in there that at 80 we fly away. When he was 80 years old, they flew away from Egypt. Is that a pattern of Israel now, when they get to 80, they fly away into the refuge, which is what Daniel 9, Revelation 12, Matthew 24, Luke 21, they all say the same thing, right? In the middle of the tribulation, that Israel, Zechariah 13, that they will have to flee into the wilderness. It's just like these patterns, once you see them and you start investigating them, they're just like, they're everywhere through the Bible. I can't not see them now. They're every time I study the Bible. I'm like, oh no, I got work to do. I can't, Lord, I can't just sit here and study this and write about this all day. It's crazy. Ugh. It's like you picked the wrong guy to start seeing this stuff. I have a family to care for too. Anyway, so that's Moses. Okay, Lori, you've probably never heard of a Neganoth.
We think he made it up.
No. So,
Picture Megadon.
yeah, Josh plays the Neganoth most Sunday mornings.
Okay, a drum?
No, a string. Well, okay, Liz plays and Adam. Yeah, it's a stringed instrument. So it could be a lyre, it could be a
Josh played
harp.
Taking off last Sunday.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. Yeah.
So the Neganoth, okay, so when I was writing the book, I was really puzzled because I could see where Psalm 128 and Psalm 80 of both of those sets, they match the middle of the tribulation period. But I kept bumping into another psalm that also even more matched the middle of the tribulation period, is Psalm 55, which I write about in the book, but I couldn't find it in a pattern. Like Psalm 55 wasn't part of a group, right, that had a sequence to it. And so a few weeks ago when I was studying, I was looking at the Greek Septuagint, and I'm looking at the headings, and I remembered a scholar was talking one time about the Essenes and how they pointed out that the Psalms are very important prophetically, and you always have to look at the heading. Well, in our Bible, like in the King James or whatever, if you look at different versions, either some have no heading, some have a different heading than another version, like the ESV is going to say something different from the... Yeah, they're all different. So I've been puzzled by that. But so I was studying in the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament, and which was written at least hundreds of years before Jesus came, right? So we know it's legit. And I'm looking at this heading, and I'm seeing that it says something about to be played on a Neganoth. Like, what in the world is a Neganoth? So I went and looked up what's a Neganoth in Hebrew, right? And a Neganoth is a stringed instrument. And then I did a little bit more investigating. I'm looking through all the Psalms, and there happened to be 7 Psalms that say the exact same heading, to be played on a Neganoth. And I'm like, okay, 7? Lord, are you trying to tell me something, right? And then I took the 7 Psalms, which are here, Psalm 4, 6, 54, 55. It landed right in the middle where I knew, according to the pattern, that's the middle of the tribulation period. It is exactly in the middle, and then of course 61, 67, and 76. And if you read those Psalms and you compare them to the 2 sets in here that match the same 7 years, they all line up. They all, like, one is about distress. Okay, that's the first year. And then the next year, where's my envelope? Got my important envelope, right. When I discovered all this, this is all I had to write on. So I'm just like, okay, I gotta write this down. So like, Psalm 4 is about distress. Well, Psalm 77 and Psalm, I didn't write the other one down, is about distress. Psalm 6, wrath and anger. Psalm 78, wrath and anger. 54, ruthless people trying to kill David, who is from Judah, right? Psalm 79, nations invading Judea, Jerusalem. Psalm 55 talks about flying away to the shelter in the desert. Psalm 80 is exactly the same thing, plus Psalm 128, being led like a shepherd. So God used, for the middle of the tribulation and the Exodus, he used 2 different metaphors. One is flying away, right? And the other is being led like a shepherd. And all of that comes to play in the middle of the tribulation again, which took me to Song of Songs, chapter 2, chapter 1, all over the place. I don't get a whole lot done here anymore, by the way. I'm kind of freaking out about that right now. But then, so Psalm 61 talks about the rock, the refuge, and that's what I call the, so in Revelation chapter 12 and a bunch of other scriptures that I've already talked about, God says that he's going to protect the remnant of Israel, right? He's going to provide for them and protect them for 3.5 years, right? Until the end of the tribulation. Then, as we know, Israel will finally cry out, "Blessed is he who comes into the name of the Lord," talking about Jesus, right? Satan has to stop that from happening. So his whole play is to bring, here's the rug pull again, right? Bring all the Jews back to Israel. Hey, we're going to build the temple. Don't worry about the Muslims anymore. We took care of them. The temple's being built. And look, God is mighty. And he's going to pretend that he's a great rabbi and a great everything, right? He's going to be a Torah scholar and all this according to the Bible. And but it's all deception, right? And then he's going to get them all, according to the pattern in the Psalms, he's going to get them all in like 2026 and 2027 to come back to Israel. I think the rest of the world is going to basically be on fire, and they're going to want to come back, according to Revelation. They're going to want to come back to Israel, where it looks like, hey man, this guy's got it going on, he's got it figured out, we're going to be sheltered there, he's our Messiah, he's the Mashiach, and the rest of the world's looking pretty rough. So even American Jews are going to be like, Hollywood's going to be emptied out, right? And they're all going to be going back to Israel just in time for the rug pull, because he needs to corral them and destroy them. That's why Zechariah says that 2/3 will be killed and 1/3 will escape. That escape is, Jesus, Matthew 24:15, explaining that he's going to basically guide them. Remember, it says, pray that it doesn't happen in the wintertime, right? Well, I don't think it is. I think it's going to be in the springtime, according to the patterns. So that's a good thing, because their journey would be very perilous if it was in the wintertime. Anyway, this well is so deep, I'm not going to